Thanks to everyone for coming. My name's Tom Landy. I have the good fortune to direct the Reverend Michael C. McFarland, S.J. Center for Religion, Ethics, and Culture here at the college. And one of the things that we do that I enjoy each year is this Thomas More lecture on faith, work, and civic life, which honors a graduate of the college who exemplifies the college's dedication to the integration of faith and learning. It's a time when we ask an alumnus and alumna to talk about how in his or her own career following Holy Cross, that alumnus has met challenges, developed a life and a career, both in service to the community, in terms of his or her faith community, and a work career. So how balancing all of those things together with family. Last fall, I was in Chicago for the 20th anniversary of Collegium, which is the faculty development program that's headquartered here at Holy Cross. At our liturgy, I was pleased to have as the celebrant Monsignor Ken Velo. Ken was Cardinal Bernardin's trusted aide, and he was the homilist at the Cardinal's funeral. My friend Father Dennis Holtschneider, the president of DePaul, had told me that Monsignor Velo was one of the great movers and shakers in Chicago. And I admired his work as one of the co-chairs of the Big Shoulders Fund, which has raised more than $200 million to support 93 inner-city Chicago Catholic schools, keep them alive and thriving, and he's told them what a great success rate they've had. As I talked to Monsignor Velo, the one thing he told me first was that the real force behind it in his mind was a man who was actually a Holy Cross alumnus, he was very proud to say, a man named Jim O'Connor, who had convinced him to come on board and to be part of it. And he told me that Jim was the real mover and shaker in Chicago. Monsignor Velo's really deep admiration for Jim made it clear to me that he was someone I would want to know more about and someone who could do a really great job on the Thomas More lecture. Having lived twice in Chicago, I'm in awe of the range of public service institutions that he's served. So tonight we're pleased to welcome Jim of the class of 1958. Jim was an economics major at Holy Cross. He went on to earn an MBA from Harvard and then attended Georgetown Law School at night while serving in the United States Air Force at the Office of Special Investigation in the District of Columbia in Washington. Upon earning his JD, Jim began working for Commonwealth Edison. He was promoted to vice president of Commonwealth Edison in 1970. He was named president in 1977 and chair in 1980, and he served there and in its parent corporation until his retirement in 1998. He spent much of his career at one company, he's pointed out, but he's been influential at a remarkable range of companies and organizations, especially serving on corporate boards. He's currently director and non-executive chairman of Armstrong World Industries, and previously he served on the boards of Bell & Howell, Borg Warner, Corning, Esmark, Everin Securities, First Chicago Corporation, Smurfit Stone Corporation, the Tribune Company, Trizec Properties, and I think for 23 years on United Airlines. Jim has been a steward of many of the cultural and civic organizations that define Chicago. He's been a trustee of the Field Museum of Natural History, the Adler Planetarium, the Chicago Symphony, the Lyric Opera, the Museum of Science and Industry, Northwestern University, and St. Xavier University. He's a director of the Chicago Urban League and president of the 100 Club of Chicago, a charity that supports the families of police and firefighters killed in the line of duty. He's past president of the Region's Catholic Charities, honorary director of the American Cancer Society, and has chaired the Chicagoland United Way's most successful fundraising campaign ever. In 1986, at the request of Chicago's Cardinal Bernardin, Jim and other businessmen founded the Big Shoulders Fund, a charity that, as I mentioned, supports inner-city Catholic schools in Chicago. It assists 93 schools and more than 24,000 students, the majority of whom at the schools live at or below the poverty level. Jim continues to serve as the fund's co-chairman. In 1993, he was named a Lincoln Laureate, the state of Illinois' highest honor. He holds honorary degrees from DePaul University, St. Xavier University, Illinois Institute of Technology, and Lewis University. He received the Georgetown University's John Carroll Award. The Kellogg Graduate School of Management at Northwestern University established a faculty chair in his name. And in 2002, he received the college's Sancta Crucis Award. Jim and his wife, Ellen, have 3 children, Fred of the class of '84, James and Elizabeth. Ellen is here with us today in the 4th row, and also Jim's grandson, James, who's with her and taking a peek at Holy Cross. We did some peeking around a little bit earlier today. We're also pleased to welcome a few of his friends, including his roommate, Tom Groark, and the president of the Big Shoulders Fund, Josh Hale. For all of you freshmen or sophomores to try and imagine, Josh, who works for the Big Shoulders Fund, is Jim Groark's son-in-law. So try and imagine years down the road when your adult child is working for your roommate from some room here, doing a great job in Chicago. So those kinds of connections that are very hard to imagine down the road, but they do happen at Holy Cross. So anyway, please join me in welcoming and thanking Jim OConnor.
It really is an honor to be here, Tom, and thank you for your very generous comments. Very, very kind and thoughtful to me and to Ellen, who's with me, and to James. Can you hear me, Ellen? Oh, that's a first, right? After 52 years, you're finally admitting that you can't hear me. Oh, it's a little bit better. Okay, I'll try to be better. But thank you so much. And Tom Groark, it really is great that you're here, my roommate from Holy Cross. You made me totally change my talk, however. I had a lot of good things to say about what a force I was on the football team and how close I was to being kind of valedictorian. All this is now out of there because Tom knows that none of that would be true. So I've got to have to be very careful in reshaping all of my remarks. But it's nice also to have Josh Hale, who, as you mentioned, is the president of Big Shoulders in Chicago, and he's an invaluable guy, Jesuit trained, went to Marquette, is just a tremendous person in the role of president of our organization, does a marvelous job. And my father used to say, he was a trial lawyer, that there is no such thing as a coincidence, but here's Josh Hale, who's married to the daughter of my roommate from college, and they're from Connecticut, and she went to the University of Chicago, meets Josh, who's at Marquette, and they get married, and I had nothing to do with it. I wasn't a matchmaker or anything else, and they're also very lucky because it's just our great people. It's a marvelous thing to be here, and I almost feel when I said to Josh that he ought to come out, he kind of acted like, if you recall the first part of the Blues Brothers, did any of you ever see that movie, The Blues Brothers? And you remember the first part where Elwood says, it's 90 miles to Chicago. I've got a full tank of gas and a half a pack of cigarettes. I've got sunglasses because it's dark outside. And at that point, you hear, and let's hit it. And they go, and this is how Josh told me the other day that he was planning to come out here and that he was going to pick up his father-in-law in Hartford and come. It's really so nice to have you. And it's especially nice to have Ellen here, because that's where we first met, was at Holy Cross at a sophomore picnic. And she was at Regis at the time, and I was a year ahead of her. And she was dating a guy who was okay, but I really didn't think was quite up to her level. So we met, and 3 years later, when I was a 21-year-old at Harvard Business School, I called her and asked her if she'd like to go out, and she said, well, who are you? And I said, well, don't you remember the sophomore picnic? And she said, why don't I get back to you? Which then she went and looked in the yearbook. One of her friends had a yearbook from Holy Cross, and she still called me back, even though she saw the pictures. She said, well, maybe it's worth trying, and we went to our first date at a place called Storyville, which was in Boston, and they had Earl Garner, who was a tremendous piano player. And our second date, a couple of weeks later, we saw Louis Armstrong, which was really quite an experience. And both of us have always been great Louis Armstrong fans. And after that performance, we went backstage, and there was a star on one room, and we knocked on the door, and he was inside all by himself. And I said, I just wanted to say hello if we could. And he said, not only say hello, come on in and sit down. And we spent 15 minutes with Louis Armstrong. It was one of the greatest experiences. I think he advanced our relationship by about 10 months, just the fact that he spent the time, because we talked about Chicago and what it meant to him, and it was just a phenomenal experience, and that was probably the beginning of a pretty good relationship that's lasted 52 years. And she really is the heart and soul, and some of our friends say the brains of our relationship. This is Ellen's been just spectacular, and all she has done to make our lives so pleasant. And it's nice to have you, James, with us. Thank you, James, for coming out and missing those classes at Loyola Academy in Chicago for one day. But, we're delighted that you are here as well. And his dad, this is my oldest son, went to Holy Cross, class of 1984, and loved the place. And he's one of the greatest boosters. I don't think he's a bigger booster than I am, however. And I think this place is in such good hands. You have a chairman, the board, Kevin Condren, who summed up Father Burroughs as follows. With Father Burroughs, you have a leader whose intimate knowledge of higher education, and specifically Jesuit higher education, profound faith and commitment to Ignatian spirituality, ability to communicate effectively to diverse audiences and perspectives on today's global issues, will serve the college very, very well. They said that at the time that he was made president, and everything I've seen, everything I've heard, we are so fortunate to have such a winner in our hands. And we thank you, Father Burroughs, for all that you do. Personally, I want to thank you. I had the privilege of meeting Father Burroughs in Florida a year ago, and then in Chicago. We spent some time together, and your leadership is so important, and we're so fortunate to have it. I remember Father Brooks. Father Brooks was president of Holy Cross for 24 years. I knew him as a corridor prefect in my first year on the 4th floor of Fenwick Hall. I then had him in my sophomore year. He was proficient in math and physics, and he was my teacher in statistics in my sophomore year. And I will tell you that Father Brooks was extremely smart, but when he marked my paper, he was extremely kind to pass me. It was a really tough course, and it was my first semester of my sophomore year, and he was a remarkable man, and he was a great leader for this institution for such a long period of time, and it was marvelous to see what he has done and now what Father Burroughs are doing for this school. Every time I turn around, and I said to Tom Gilmore earlier tonight, not a Saturday goes by when Holy Cross is playing football that I'm not, and Ellen will tell you this, calling in to the college if I don't have a computer and asking what the score was of the game. She said, I can't believe this. You're out of the place for 50-some years, and you're worried about how they did against a certain school. And you seem, and of course, I love it when they beat Harvard, which is occasionally, which is nice to see. But I follow their fortunes as closely as I possibly can, and I really get a treat by the way that this college handles this sport as effectively and good as they do. And Coach Gilmore is to be commended for the job that he does. But everywhere I look, I see certain things that are remarkable about Holy Cross, and you know them yourselves. There's an organization that's called the Alumni Factor, which is the first time they've had a platform that really takes the composite view of all the reasons why a school is good. And they came out with a report last fall, I believe, that had Holy Cross among the top 10 in the United States and second among liberal arts schools. Now, here they are in the company of Stanford and West Point and Yale, Princeton, in the top 10. And this is a very sophisticated thing with sampling of thousands and tens of thousands of alumni as to how they felt about the school and what the school meant to them from the career standpoint and from a success standpoint. And you see something like that, and that's something you can't make up. I mean, that's for real sort of a judgment as to how good this school is. And you see what Mr. Pryor did with his recent commitment of $25 million to the school, and what he wound up saying at the time that he gave the gift, when he said, my father graduated from Holy Cross in 1923 and from Yale Law School in 1926. Holy Cross and its professors offer students an extraordinary education. I believe that there is none finer in the United States. And this comes from a man who was a Fulbright scholar. He was a naval person in the Navy program here. Is someone who had a remarkable record, went on to business school after Holy Cross, and made this enormous commitment to our school and to the future that we have. Before I leave football, one thing I've always found about going to the nature of the football program here is the way that people are integrated into the system, the football team with the rest of the student body. In fact, that was also true in my era in the 50s. The guys who were the stars of the football team were just as nice to us as they were to anybody else, or on the football team or otherwise. And they were just incredible people. I broke my leg in my first year living on the 4th floor of Fenwick. Went up to Mount Washington in North Conway, New Hampshire. My roommate had been a junior champion from Pittsfield, Massachusetts, in downhill skiing, and he thought it would be really great if we went up there together. And, of course, we went up there, and the first thing he said when I got to the top of the hill was, let's race down. And, of course, I had done virtually no skiing in my life, and about maybe 30 seconds later, I wound up wrapped around a tree with a broken leg. And the people that really were taking care of me on the way home, that drove us home, were Bob Cooney, who was a man who just died from Rhode Island a few months ago, I think, Father, who was that year voted in Look magazine as the unsung major lineman of the year. The nicest guy you could possibly meet. Tom Carstens, who was with him, came from Chicago, Fenwick High School. And Tom could not have been kinder or more interested in making certain that we were going to be okay, or that I was going to be all right on the ride back, and then getting me up to the 4th floor of Fenwick. I mean, this is the kind of what I think of Holy Cross when I think of people being really together and having a good experience here. We had a great team in my sophomore year. We got as high as 13th in the national ranking, and then Penn State came to town. I won't tell you where we wound up after that game, but because Penn State was a powerhouse then as it is today. And that was also the game that really introduced Jim Brown to the big time. And Jim Brown was the phenomenal player that they had, maybe the greatest player in college football. And we started the game by getting ahead by 9-0 and wound up losing 49-9 after Jim Brown was brought into the action on the field. But it was a great place to be a part of, and great to know the people who were here. And remember, the sports history of Holy Cross, you had a baseball team that was a national champion, I think in 1953. You had a basketball team that was the national champion in 1947, and then was winning the NIT at a time when it was a better and more important place to play than the NCAA back then. And they had this incredible, and they had a very good football program. And still today, to be competitive, I think, is important. And I know that's one of the things that the trustees and Father Burrows are looking at, is how to do this and still not break the line and do the things that you shouldn't do to maintain that level of really good satisfaction. When I was in college, one of the writings that had a major impact on me was the work of John Henry Cardinal Newman. And he published a series of discourses about 150 years ago under the general title of The Idea of a University. And give me a little bit of license while I quote this, one passage from his work. When a multitude of people, keen, open-hearted, sympathetic, and observant, come together and freely mix with each other, they are sure to learn from one another. The conversation of all is a series of lectures to each, and they gain for themselves new ideas and views, fresh matter of thought, and distinct principles for judging and acting day by day. And I know Father Burrows, and reflecting on that a little bit, and looking at what you said at the retreat about what is the role of a university is to get people to really think and to choose. And I think that's what you do at Holy Cross. I mean, you do have this environment that causes people to really focus on what's important in life. And Tom Landy, again, thanks to you for the special brand of leadership that you bring the Thomas More Lecture Series, because it's really unique. In a few months, you're going to hear from the former president of Ireland, Mary McAleese, who I had the pleasure, Ellen and I did, of meeting a couple of weeks ago, sharing a platform with. And she's a remarkable lady. And here she came from the worst possible area in Belfast, the Catholic area, which was really a troubled area, and then rose to the position to be president of the entire country. And her story is one that I urge you all to come and hear if you are able to do so. I've gone to lectures and occasions like this and heard people talk about the obstacles that they've overcome in their lives to get to a position of success. And I racked my brain and try as I could, and I see another two classmates who are here, Mike Kickham and Bill Kent. Thank you both for being here. And I think, I didn't have that. I had nothing but as good a life as one could ever possibly have expected growing up. I mean, I had the perfect childhood, if you would. I can't remember anything that was really bad about it. I had loving parents and good schools and great nuns in grade school. I went to a Jesuit high school, St. Ignatius, which was terrific. And they steered me toward Holy Cross, my father and mother. And my father, especially so, just wasn't into this at all. My mom thought if I went to any Jesuit school, that would be good. And at St. Ignatius, Father Grant suggested that I consider Holy Cross, which was about the best thing he could have ever done for me. I also had my best friend in high school was planning to come here, Tim Mulcahy. And yet during the summer, his dad passed away. So he had to change his plans and not come here. So when I came, there was only one other person I knew who was kind of our genius in math at St. Ignatius, and Richard Baker. And Richard and I really weren't always on the same wavelength. He was really a genius. The guy was so bright. And he came here and he just knocked the lights out in the math area. And was a great star in that. But that was all I knew when I first came here. But I had great people helping me everywhere I went. People who stepped out and made a difference or threw a hand out to me to lift me up. And I left from Holy Cross, went to Harvard, which was quite an experience. Probably would not recommend that today to anybody at that age to start Harvard Business School, where the average age of people starting is about 27 or 28 today. That was not what I was used to. I wasn't used to that kind of discipline in my life. As much as I tried in time to ignore this part, how hard I studied at Holy Cross, I wasn't quite used to that. Don't say anything about that. But I had a good experience there, and I met a former Holy Cross person, General Murray, who was at the school, and he asked what I was going to do when I finished at Harvard. And I said, I had 3 years commitment in the Air Force. And he said, where are you going to go? And I said, I'm planning to go to wherever they'll have me. And he said, well, have you thought about what you're going to do after? You're not going to stay in the Air Force. I said, no, I'm not. He said, well, have you thought about your career after that? And I said, well, I'd like to become a lawyer. And he said, well, you could go to Washington. They have places for you down there, and you could go to law school at night at Georgetown, which is exactly what I did. But again, somebody stepped forward, in that case, once again, somebody from Holy Cross, who gave me the idea and put me on that track to go there and go there for night school. And then when I was getting out of there, and I was interviewed by a handful of people that offered me opportunities, and one person who made the greatest impression on me was the one who said, if you come to Commonwealth Edison, I will know where you are in your career. He didn't say, you got a leg up, but he just said, I will know where you are, which meant a lot to me because so often the person recruits, he just passes your name out and you get hired and you're off and running. But would have somebody who was in a position of major importance in the company say, I'll keep my eye out on you, meant a big deal to me as I thought about that going forward. And that's advice that I can offer to some of the students today as you think about in time where you might want to wind up. It makes a big difference if somebody has a personal interest in you and what you are able to do for a company or whatever organization that you might become involved in. One of your speakers a few months ago, B.J. Casson, in his comments that I listened to, said one thing about being in business is that you don't want to ever feel too comfortable. And he had moved from one place to another, to another, to another. And I didn't have that luxury because I was so involved where I was in the position I was in the company that I went to. We had a company that we were the largest nuclear power producer in the United States. We had 6 nuclear units operating. We had 6 more on order at the time that I was asked to manage those projects and bringing them online, which was kind of a big deal. And we brought them on at a time when roughly half of the nuclear power plants under construction in the 1970s and 1980s went under. Shoreham up in New Hampshire, Seabrook up in New Hampshire, Shoreham down in Long Island, and just a whole mess of others just were canceled because they got to be too expensive and too difficult to try to manage and get online. We brought them online, and they served the company over time, I think, really quite well. I wanted to talk tonight not so much about the career steps that I had in the company, the various things that I tried to do or did, but rather about the traits that I have found in my experience to be helpful as one goes through a business life or as one encounters a profession. what are the things that I think might serve you well? And with your indulgence, I'd like to kind of recite them. I'm not going to call them the 10 Commandments, even though I think there are 10 or 11 of them. But the things that I have found to be very important as you go to your jobs or go to your careers, or even as you go to your summer work, that might serve you well. I think the most important of all is attitude. Without attitude, you're dead. And it's so detectable. And so, people look very carefully to see how you come to a job, how you approach it. Is it a mindset? Yes, it's a mindset. It's a real belief. It's a belief also that you're going to give it 150% and nothing short of that. That's really critical. If you come in with that chip on your shoulder or kind of a arrogant way about it, in my experience, it won't serve you very well. It can serve you very well temporarily because you're viewed as a hot shot or however, but it will not serve you well over the long term in my judgment. Second is the importance of having a good judgment. And judgment in the sense of not just intellectual judgment, but common sense judgment is so critical to people as they. So it's in a way it's street sense. Do you read? How do you read people? And you can't read them very well unless you listen to them. It starts all with listening. In order to understand them, to relate to them, you've got to understand what they're saying before you can do that. And so many people are anxious to let everybody know what they're thinking that they sometimes forget the importance of getting that kind of feedback. It's important. It's very important. The third area is to have goals. And I'm going to make a distinction between a goal and a commitment. In my judgment, a commitment is something that you have to do if you make the commitment. A goal is something that you will try your darndest to do. But a commitment is really a little bit different. There's a big difference between the two. We had a fellow in Chicago who ran a bank on the South Side named Stu Collins, who was a very poignant reminder to me. He was helpful. We were raising funds for various organizations on the South Side, and people would come in and say, put me down for 5 tables, put me down for 3 tables, or whatever the number happened to be. And Stu would say, put me down for 4 tables. And you knew when Stu said that there would be 4 tables at a minimum coming in. He viewed, it wasn't doing this for the crowd when he said 4 tables. He was letting people know that you've got a marker from me that I will be good for those 4 tables. You knew you could book it the moment he said it, which was really quite different. Then you go back to somebody else and you say, hey, Joe, I thought you said you were going to make an effort. And he said, well, yeah, I kind of made an effort, but I wasn't able to deliver 3 tables or 5 tables or whatever it is. But when Stu said, put me down, I'll do that, you knew it was done. And there is a big difference as you go through life. Those people you can count on who make that level of commitment. You have to make the distinction between goals and commitments. The next item is that I think so often that the quest for excellence is inner-directed, rather than looking for the praise from outside or the promise of a bigger paycheck or the next promotion that you might receive, but something that just drives you personally, that is important to you, is propelled by your own self-worth. Who we are and the pride and satisfaction that comes from being the right kind of person, doing the right kind of thing. Next is a results orientation. And this is where James, your father, my son, and my other 2 children get so upset with me when they talk about all they're devoting in energy to get something done. And I'll say, did you put any points on the board? And they say, no, that's not the point. I'm working as hard as I possibly can. I'm doing this, that, and the other thing. I said, I know, but what can you show me that you've been able to do as a result of all this effort? And it really is, in the business world and in other places, as much energy as you expend, it's far less important that you do that than it is that you are able to quantify what you've contributed to the process. I know that sometimes sounds difficult because everybody likes to think if you're putting your best into it, that's probably good enough. In the business world, it isn't enough. You've got to be registering that you are making progress in the areas that you're involved in. So the results orientation is very important. Enthusiasm for what you're doing. You've got to be enthusiastic about it. And it was Henry Ford who said, with enthusiasm, anything is possible. And I do believe that. And you get somebody who's just kind of laid back and going with the flow, it's a lot different than getting somebody who's really got their shoulder to the wheel and making a difference. You got to understand that things are a team sort of effort. And Bear Bryant had a great comment when he was asked about the success of his football team. He said, you got to understand that it's not so much a question of team, of I, or just of me, Bear Bryant. This is a team effort, and I only want it to be portrayed that way, that's what's really critical. You'll also find that you can buy a person's time. You can also compel that person's presence in the workplace. You can even demand a certain element or degree of accountability. But you can't buy enthusiasm. And you can't buy loyalty. Loyalty is something that you have to earn. And it takes a while to get there oftentimes. And loyalty cannot be extended to someone if there is no reciprocity. Loyalty has to go both ways. It's both to the people for whom you work as well as to those who work for you. And I'll just tell you, after being involved with a lot of companies over a lot of years and talking about who's the next in line for management succession, who can do this job and that job, you always look at three things about the individual. You say, how does he report to the people above him? How does he act toward the people below him? And, really important and often forgotten, is how does he handle his relationships with the people who are this peer group, who don't report to him and he doesn't report to them. That's really critical, and that has been the end of more careers than I could possibly tell you. Some people are real good looking up, some people are pretty good looking down, but an awful lot of people fail in their ability to manage relationships with their peers in various areas of their business. So that's got to be very important. And this ties in also with a real successful manager or person in business is somebody who will give credit to others. And I kind of feel that there are two kinds of groups of people. There are the credit givers and the credit takers. And you find an awful lot of people in that latter category who are credit takers. And you normally see that pretty early on in the relationship, as opposed to the person who recognizes what others are giving to a project, or who understand that the good manager is recognizing that he deals with people and not with robots. And we all give notion to the notion that people are not all the same, but we often fail to translate that truism into how we deal with the people in the workplace. And this recognition of differences simply means that we have to take people as they are and not always as we might always like them to be. There was a little-known author by the name of Arnold Burnett who observed some time ago that it is best when judging someone else to remember that he is judging you with the same godlike and superior impartiality. And I think we oftentimes don't do that. We got to think about how other people are valuing how we're performing. Good executives bring a lot of intensity to what they do, a lot of enthusiasm to what they're involved in. My two stars in my business life, one was the head of Arthur Andersen back in the 70s. One was the head of a firm called Leo Burnett, who was the founder, actually Leo Burnett himself. And Leo Burnett only had about 24 major clients, one of the largest advertising firms in the world. They had United Airlines, they had big cereal companies, they had little Commonwealth Edison. We were the smallest one that they had. And yet if Leo Burnett felt that you were told there was a problem associated with it, he would be all over it. He'd have you out to his home on the weekend. You'd spend 12, 15 hours with him on that one simple project, and how do you salvage a certain amount of a problem that's there. Whenever a problem arose and it was brought to his attention, he'd drop everything to spend time on it. You almost felt that if they lost the account, that he felt they'd take the sign off the door, the Leo Burnett sign off the door. That's how personal it was to him. Most talks that I've heard in universities or at business schools address the big issues, the global issues, how to deal with the threat of competition from abroad, or sacrificing technological innovation for short-term profits, or dealing with the assaults being made on the capitalistic system, and on and on and on and on. And that's good. Those are probably important topics. But I submit that in this changing world, you'll never get to the big issues until you have honed your skills on the little things in life. What I'm suggesting is that in business there is a lot of room for doing the gracious and the courteous thing. Courtesy in recognizing the importance, and boy, is this ever critical, of being on time for appointments. Boy, that just has destroyed more careers than I can ever cite to you. Graciousness in treating others like guests, particularly from outside the enterprise that you're involved in, so far as to go beyond the end of the desk when you're greeting them or saying goodbye to them. That's extended in a lot of ways, such as a handwritten note or a phone call to somebody who has a person in their family that's ill or challenged in one way or another. A simple thank you note. And I'm going to hand something out in a little while that says the value of a handwritten note is so incredibly important versus an email or a letter that you dictate to somebody. A simple hello or a kind word when you're passing a fellow employee's desk can mean all the world to that person's self-worth. So little things really do mean a lot. Little things that are a way of life for the really good manager or the good executive, yet often are almost totally absent in the style of those who have failed to make the grade. On a less serious note, try to remember to keep your sense of perspective and maintain your sense of humor. Be sure that you've got to take your job seriously, but try never to take yourself too seriously. Finally, I can't let the opportunity go by without suggesting to everyone in this room, the young people, that you can really make a difference in life going forward if you think about what you can do. Long ago, quite a remarkable man by the name of Horace Mann made the comment that be ashamed to die unless you have won some victory for humanity. In other words, make a contribution. Do something for other than yourself. Do something that's really important to others. And don't deny your special talents to others when the need is so great. And don't deny the opportunity for the satisfaction that's to be derived from making a contribution that will improve the lot of others. It becomes a thing that's really, really important. And I have it with Ellen and the things that she's involved in Chicago, particularly with the Boys and Girls Clubs. I have it with our kids. Our daughter, who's a Jesuit-trained product from Georgetown, spent first year in Inglewood after college, going to Georgetown and teaching in an inner-city school, 5th grade. We hardly ever saw her. She hardly got home before 9:30 at night, any night, and Chicago can be, as you know, a violent city. And she went and taught there for a while. My son went off to Africa to teach in a school outside of Johannesburg, a very poor school, for a year. He thought was one of the great experiences. And then he went to Kellogg, as all of our kids, for their graduate work. And he started a program there that got the students, between the time that they finished Kellogg and went to their job, rather than do that, to spend time in some country or someplace doing some good work. And he got a huge number of people over the years that have been a part of that program. They call it the Kellogg Kiddie Corps, where people spend that time between when they graduate and when they go out to their first major job to do some good work. And I think this fits a little bit with the description of success that Ralph Waldo Emerson recited some years ago. And he said as follows: to laugh often and much, to win the respect of intelligent people and the affection of children, to earn the appreciation of honest critics and endure the betrayal of false friends, to appreciate beauty, to find the best in others, to leave the world a bit better, whether by a healthy child or a redeemed social condition, to know that even one life has breathed easier because you lived. This is to have succeeded. I use that quote a lot. I carry it in my pocket. It's, I think, very meaningful, and it has meant so much to me in terms of what can be done by people to give back to society. And that kind of brings me to Big Shoulders, which you talked about, Tom. And I'm so pleased to have my fellow president from Big Shoulders here, Josh Hale, who's the best thing that ever happened to the organization. Josh is a whirlwind. He's known throughout our city as probably the most competent executive director of a not-for-profit in the city of Chicago today. And what he has done, when he retires or decides to do something else, that's the day I'm going to announce that I'm going to leave Big Shoulders, because I've been kind of trading a lot on the success that he's been responsible for causing for us. And why is this so important? But if you permit me, indulge me with one more quote on the importance of what we're involved in. And this comes from a Chilean poet by the name of Gabriela Mistral, who won the Nobel Prize back in 1945. And here's what she said. "We are guilty of many errors and many faults, but the worst crime is abandoning the children, neglecting the foundation of life. Many of the things we need can wait. The child cannot. Right now is the time his bones are being formed, his blood is being made, and his senses being developed. To him we cannot answer tomorrow. His name is today." So when Cardinal Bernardine called me, and along with 3 others, to ask if we'd participate in this program back in 1986, it was with the thought in mind that these are children. You know, when I think of the big hardships that I haven't had in my life, and I think of what kids in the inner city have to endure to get through school, it's just almost unimaginable. The gangs in their areas, the violence in their areas, the fact that in so many cases it's a single parent that's causing them to go to school or encouraging them to go to school at tremendous cost. The average cost of an elementary school education for tuition in Chicago is about $4,500. It's a fraction of what it is in the public schools, by the way. It's about 2.5 to 3 times that much the cost in the public schools to educate a child. But for tuition, that's a huge burden on a family that's in the poverty level, that's just barely scraping by. So somebody has to come up with a portion of that. And this is why it is important, as you mentioned. We've had the ability to raise about $250 million in the past 25 years for the program to keep these schools open. It's very hard for the Archdiocese. And my hat is really off to our Cardinal in Chicago, who's been behind this program. And what we've seen elsewhere, in New York, they've had some 40 schools that have been closed in the last 2 years. In Philadelphia, the same thing. 40 schools have either been closed or consolidated in the last 2 years. And we've seen major metropolitan areas with large closings of schools. And our program, as we've so often said, is not just for Catholic children. In fact, really quite the contrary. We don't ask whether they're Catholic or not. Can we support the school? And my favorite example of that is 7 years ago, there's a school in Chicago called St. Therese Chinese Mission School, right in the heart of Chinatown. 62% of the children come from families beneath the poverty line. And the school got in real trouble. The pastor didn't like the principal, fired the principal. A new principal came in, and the enrollment went down dramatically. And they had 43 students at that particular time, and she had $8 in her kitty to pay. And she was about this time in May, and she had 2 more paychecks to honor. And she called Big Shoulders, and she came in and talked to me. And I asked her a little bit about the children. I said, how many of these children are really got a problem? She said, every one of them. She said, we're actually at 94% in that particular school, 94% on the poverty line. She said, but the kids do very well. Historically, we test well. I said, well, tell me what you mean by that. She said, well, in the science area, we're upwards of 95th percentile. I said, that's pretty good. She said, in the math area, we're above 95th percentile. I said, that's really good. I said, but tell me about English. She said, well, we slip a little bit in English. We're only 94th percentile in English. I said, well, that's not too shabby to have that. And she said, well, we just, hopefully this school can be maintained. And it was on the bubble. We thought it was kind of on the hit list for the Archdiocese. And a couple of people we knew came in, and we told them the story. And I told this lady who came in, I said, we can't lose you because your marks are so high. You're going to screw up our average that we're telling the public of our inner city schools. I mean, you've got this fabulous performance that you've been able to maintain, and we want to at least continue that. Today, that same school, I asked her, I said, by the way, how many Catholics are in the school? And she said, we have 2. I said, well, that's a start. And she said, I said, tell me about them. And she said, well, those are my 2 children. This was, her name was Phyllis Cavallone. She had 2 little children, and since she was teaching school, she thought they should go there as well. They were the only 2 children who were not Chinese at that time. Today, in that school, they have an enrollment of 350 people. They have a wait list of 470 people. They teach Mandarin, they teach Cantonese, Spanish, as well as English. It's an extraordinary story of just as great success of that school and what that has meant in that community. This is so true of so many of the other schools that we have. Tab, I know I'm going longer than I should. But people ask, why are you involved in Big Shoulders? And what does it mean to you? And why do others get involved? And they get involved because they want to be associated with an institution where you can measure the results of their efforts, where you can say that 97% of the kids who go to our Big Shoulder schools will finish high school. That's huge in a city like Chicago. That's unheard of. Or that 87% of the children who finish our schools will go to college. And in Chicago today, only 6 or 7% of the children in the public school system will receive a degree from a college by the age of 25. 6 or 7%. And we're up there, I think it's fair to say, in excess of 75% of our kids finish college. We know they start there, and we're tracking how well they do. But that's a huge difference in performance overall. And these are in schools that are, in the poorest possible neighborhoods. But one kind of really interesting thing about our schools, we spend over $100 million in the city of Chicago for security in our public schools. And you always see the guys with the yellow jackets in our public schools. There's not $1 spent for security in the Catholic schools. That's because of the respect that they enjoy in the community, and that everybody out there in the gangs especially know that the wrath of God will be put on the people who mess with their schools and what those schools do for them. I mean, it's just amazing, though, that they leave them alone because they are so important, and they're many times the only thing that is really stable in the communities where they're located. We have had a situation in Chicago where enrollment has dropped dramatically. In fact, it's gone from 344, this is overall in the Archdiocese, from 344,000 50 years ago to 86,000 today. So 24,000 of those kids are in our inner city Catholic schools. But we are seeing an increase in enrollment in the inner city schools, which is terrific. Not much, but enough, and enough to give us great heart that we can continue to do that. Now, in Chicago, they're going to close 53 public schools. That's a lot. And so those kids are going to have to find a place to go somewhere. They're either going to go to another public school that's far away from where they presently live, or they'll have the opportunity possibly to come with us, which we also think will be working to help us increase our enrollment. So we know that one of the important things is that by the time our kids make it to the 7th grade, they're 2 years ahead of what they're being able to achieve in the public school system. And on the national average, taking all the schools across the country, they're well above what they are. So people like it because we can quantify the results, and they like it also because they like to work with people they really enjoy being with and participating cooperatively with. We've got a phenomenal co-chair in Monsignor Vilo, who's the best public speaker I think I've ever heard. And the other co-chair is a man by the name of John Canning, who heads the most successful private equity firm between the East and West Coast in Chicago called Madison Dearborn. And he is totally committed. This man has 150 kids under scholarship, personal scholarships. And he sees them each twice a year to come to his office and go through a little scorecard on how well they're doing. Can you imagine that? And that's the kind of commitment that he has, and that's how deeply. The other thing is he's not Catholic. And in fact, the Cardinal calls him our in-house heathen. That he just, because he's just does this because he thinks this is so important. And he just thinks, as we do, that you probably can't be involved in anything that's more important. I'm going to conclude here in a second. These are not ordinary times in our society, as you know. What's happened in Boston recently. The night after that, Ellen and I went to the symphony and heard Ricardo Moody start. And really, before he took the baton and went up to begin the concert, and they were doing a piece by Johann Sebastian Bach that was about Mass. And he pointed out, he said, the last 3 words of this are really important in the Mass because they're Dona Nobis Pacem, grant us peace. And he said, at this time of what is happening in our area in Chicago with the violence in the streets, what we're seeing in Boston with violence, what we're seeing around the world, it's most appropriate to say, Dona Nobis Pacem. And I feel that way about the things we're involved in. I think it is shameful what we have in this nation in terms of our education system at the lower levels. We know in Chicago that despite billions and billions of dollars, that the system is not really much better than it was 30 years ago when we were described as the worst public school system in the United States. We know that more can be done. We know that more accountability can be established. We've just got to find a better formula. And we hope that some way, through our Little Big Shoulders program, we'll give the opportunity for others to see what can be done to make things successful. We live in a time of infinite difficulty and historic change, either in this country, in our city, or abroad. And this is why someplace like Holy Cross and why the students here today are so important to helping find the answers to the problems that trouble society so much. You will make a huge difference, and they're so refreshing to come here, Father and Tom, and see the quality of student that you have, to meet some of them this evening, to enjoy their company and to participate in this lecture has really meant a great deal to me. So I want to thank all of you, and I'm going to stop there, if I may, Tom, and answer for a few minutes any questions that people might have, if that's the appropriate thing to do. I do want to do one thing, though. I was given a book last week called The Man to See, and this is about the legendary trial lawyer who's got a building here, Edward Bennett Williams. And this was written, a very good friend of mine, Walter Isaacson, was the co-author of a book called The Wise Men, which is a very famous book about 30 years ago. And this guy is a very good writer. I just started to read it, but he's talking about Holy Cross when Edward Bennett Williams came here. And he said, when graduates, I'm quoting, when graduates of the old Holy Cross try to describe their school to an outsider, they sometimes use martial analogies. The College of the Holy Cross was as strict as West Point, as tough as the Marine Corps. It was boot camp for the mind and spirit, with Jesuits as drill sergeants. Like a military academy, Holy Cross had a clearly defined mission to produce humanistic gentlemen, this, of course, back before 1970, humanistic gentlemen devoted to the greater glory of God. To the weak and slow, the training was an ordeal. To the survivors, it could be a glorious crucible. The rule book, almost finished, rule book Ed Williams handed when he entered Holy Cross, was handed in September 1937, was by modern standards laughably strict. Students could not play cards. They could not listen to the radio before 3 p.m. or after 7 p.m. Or have a woman in their room ever. And it goes on and on. And I was reminded of this, having come here in the 50s when you went to Mass every morning and were checked off. You were checked off every night that you were in your room, and the lights were off. And if they, and as they say about Edward Bennett Williams, he did a lot of his studying under the sheets, just with his flashlight, because you couldn't have lights on after 10 or 10:30 at night. But it was quite an experience. And of course, we also had the experience at that time of having orals, which students don't have today, where you had the combination of all the things that you studied in philosophy and logic and epistemology, cosmology, psychology, the whole bit, and you had two Jesuits who could have you for, am I right, Father, about a full hour to determine whether or not you were prepared. But this was given at the end of your senior year. So do you think we had fun in the second semester of our last year in college? There was no way, because you had to pass this, and your passing was conditioned. So it was a remarkable thing. And one of the great things about that period, many of you remember Tom Heinsohn, who was the great player with the Celtics, and he was a couple of years ahead of me. And they claimed that Tom Heinsohn, and there's no way to ever prove this, but the rumor got out that he had the highest mark ever recorded in the oral exams. Now, Tom was a very smart man, by the way, and a great, great basketballer, twice the consensus All-American, and a remarkable guy who also happened to be a great painter. And he was incredible. But oral exams were really, really tough at that point of the year. And so they made you work right to the very last day of college in my era, and I'm sure they're doing that again now, Father. I think it's a great thing to do. But thank you again. Please, any questions? Please, whatever you would like to ask. I've covered far too many areas, I'm afraid. But I hope I've given you some food for thought. I do have two handouts I'm going to leave with you. They're pass-outs, Tom, if that's all right. And one of them is a note that Abraham Lincoln wrote to the teacher of his son, one of his sons, which is fascinating to read. Now, I have a son-in-law who went to Harvard, and I told him I was going to give this out, and he said, well, you know, Lincoln probably did not write that. He said, I think it's something that was written by John Hay, one of his assistants. And I said, Michael, you got to be kidding. Where do you get this? And he said, well, it's just the way he wrote it, because Hay would have done it a little just like this. And I said, give me a break, Michael. This is written by Lincoln, and I plan to hand it out at a lecture at Holy Cross. And the other item is just kind of interesting, written by an 80-year-old man, and talks about the things that are important in life that you should think about. And there are some nice thoughts in there and interesting thoughts. And one thing it says, or by the time you reach my age, you should be getting 8 hours a night, maybe plus an hour during the day of a nap. And I'm trying to figure out how to do that, but I haven't found the way to do that yet. Yes, please, Father.
Jim, you know, when President Lundy was reading off your credentials, I turned to your grandson and I said, when did you have time to do a job? I mean, the listing of all the charities you've done, how do you manage your professional life and your contributions to society and also raising kids? How do you create balance? I mean, other than you married properly.
I did that.
Because I think that's the question we're all being asked today. Life is going faster and faster and faster, and
Right.
you've carved out a significant amount of your life to give back to others. How did you manage it?
Well, I think what my children would tell you that, first of all, I underparented. You know, today we accuse our kids of overparenting from 8 o'clock on Saturday morning until 8 o'clock on Sunday night. All they do is spend time with their children, which is phenomenal. I didn't do that. Now, Ellen did that a lot, but I was in the office most of the time trying to catch up on things. But part of that, I think, is just trying to be organized and trying to get good people to work with. Again, you can't ever lead an organization unless you have real talent who's with you. And I tried to find in organizations that I became involved with others who could carry most of the load or much of the load. And I think that if I had some success, I did get people to work with who made a huge difference. Because there's no way to spend the hours that would have otherwise been required. But thanks for that question, though. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? And I hope listing the traits of things that I think have been important in my experience in business will prove to you to be of some importance as you think about where you're going to wind up in your careers. But Tom, thank you very much. Thank you all for your thoughts.